Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
Today, as promised yesterday, we're going to continue talking about hats, and we'll do that in today's lesson. And it's hats off for hats. We're going to celebrate hats. We're going to congratulate hats. And we're talking about their history, primarily in the West. I think you probably have different sensibilities for hats here in Taiwan and in Asia. You can talk about that amongst yourselves, but we're talking primarily about hats in the West. And let's see, last time we talked about the headdresses for leaders in Egypt. We also talked about the pileus hat of Athens, Greece, that indicated the wearer was of the lower classes. We got the petasos, which was worn by people who worked in the fields. And what else? We talked about the stovepipe top hat of Lincoln and bowler caps of respectable people in London during Victorian times.
Well, today we're going to be focusing on some hats that women wear. There's some really interesting types of hats we'll get into, and we'll kind of give you a description of them. Of course, you'll want to look some more of these up online. I know the royal family in Britain actually gets into hats quite a bit, so you'll want to look those up. I'm sure you'll see them in just the everyday news when the royal family's in the news. Right now, though, we're going to read through day 2. Many of the hats just mentioned are intended for men. However, some women's hats are equally fascinating and worthy of closer inspection. Cloche hats. Cloche is French for bell, and it was in France that these hats came into being. Caroline Reboux, a French milliner, devised a bell-shaped hat that was easy to make and customize. The cloche hat was popular because it was simple yet sophisticated and gave the wearer an air of confidence and independence. Cloche hats were in vogue in the 1920s. Pillbox hats. This hat dates back to the days of the late Roman Empire. Round with a flat top, this hat can still be seen in modern armed forces. The name could refer to small circular boxes for carrying pills, or to pillboxes, which are round defensive positions made of concrete. The hat resembles both. Women's pillbox hats were especially popular in the 1950s and 60s. Former U.S. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy was a notable public figure who wore them. Fascinator hats. These hats are so elaborate that their wearers can't help but stand out from a crowd. They were first created by French Queen Marie Antoinette in the 18th century. She added feathers, flowers, jewelry, and even miniatures to her hats. The term for them was coined in the 1970s when British milliner Stephen Jones wanted a name suggesting uniqueness and extravagance. These days, fascinator hats are often worn by royals, such as Catherine, Princess of Wales, who adorns hers with flowers, ribbons, and bows. While these hats aren't worn on a daily basis, check out pictures of any royal or formal occasion in the UK, and you'll see the tradition of fancy hats is still going strong.
Okay, it's time now for us to discuss the contents of today's lesson. We're continuing to talk about hats. And, of course, in the first part of our lesson, we talked about some examples of hats from history. Well, here in the first paragraph, it says, many of the hats just mentioned are intended for men. So, indeed, most of the hats we talked about in the first program, our first day's program, we're talking about hats for men. However, some women's hats are equally fascinating and worthy of closer inspection. So, if something's fascinating, of course, it's very, very interesting. If it's worthy of something, then it deserves to be paid attention to. Or a person may be worthy, they deserve to get something from somebody higher than them. Oh, I'm not worthy of a raise, I just haven't worked hard enough to deserve a raise. And here, inspection just means if you look closely at something to observe the details.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking more closely at some of these hats. Of course, you would probably expect that women's hats are going to be more elaborate, more decorative than most men's hats. So we're going to take the day and focus on some of these crazy women's hats. Not so crazy for some people who really love them. The first one we're going to look at is the cloche hat. Cloche is a French word. It's not English, but it stands for bell. It means bell in French. If you're into cooking shows like I am, you've probably seen them use the cloche to keep things warm. Or if you go to a restaurant and you order room service, they'll deliver your food, and it's usually under a silver dome. That's a cloche. So you'll know what to call those in the future. Well, they use it for hats too, and it was invented or came into being in France, the country itself. So if you come into being, that's when you start to exist. It could be an idea, a thought, a trend. It could be a new invention. It could be anything that comes into being. These are hats we're talking about, of course. And this one was invented in France.
Indeed, that's when they started to become common. And we've got Caroline Ribaud, who was a French milliner. She devised a bell-shaped hat that was easy to make and customize. A milliner is a person who makes hats, and she came up with this idea for a hat for women. It's bell-shaped. It's shaped like a bell. And it was easy to make, and you could also customize this hat, which means you could make it special or unique. I believe a lot of them were crocheted, so you could use different colored yarn in them. You could add different embellishments to them, and they covered the woman's head pretty much all the way. These hats were popular, I think, in the 1920s in the U.S. You see a lot of old films of women dancing the Charleston, wearing these hats that cover their head pretty much completely. So yes, indeed, you can customize the hat. And to customize, again, just makes it is just to make it fit the person's personality. It's unique and different.
Now, it says here it was popular because it was simple, yet sophisticated. If something's sophisticated, it's developed to a high degree, or it fits somebody who, has a good education, understands the world, is not naive about things. So they've been out there. A lot of the models that you see modeling in these magazines look very sophisticated. Whereas if you're looking at people who are just dressed in shorts and a top and a baseball cap, that's not very sophisticated looking. So if you're sophisticated looking, it looks a little bit sharper, a little bit nicer dressed. It could be expensive. It doesn't necessarily have to be expensive, but you're kind of dressed up if you're in something that looks sophisticated. And the hat gave the wearer, the person wearing it, an air of confidence and independence. So this was a big deal to women at that period in history because a lot of them were becoming more vocal. They were getting out there and trying to work a little bit more than they had in the past. They were given the vote, the ability to vote in some of these countries. And so, they just, they wanted to be out there instead of just at home taking care of the kids and cooking. So cloche hats were in vogue or popular or fashionable in the 1920s. This phrase in vogue comes from fashion. It just means, of course, there's the Vogue magazine. So if it's in vogue, it meant that it was stylish at the time. Things are in vogue and they go out of vogue. They're fashionable and then they become unfashionable. It just depends on what's popular at the time.
Okay, so we've talked about cloche hats. Now let's talk about pillbox hats. That's kind of interesting. This type of hat dates back to the days of the late Roman Empire. So the Romans kind of went out of style there, maybe around the Middle Ages or so. So this hat dates back to that time. It's when it started. And round with a flat top, this hat can still be seen in modern armed forces. So yeah, it's round and then it's got a flat top. It doesn't have a round top like the cloche does. This one is round on the sides and then flat on top. And again, lots of people in armed forces, like in the army or the navy or whatever, a lot of soldiers wear these kinds of hats.
They sure do. So that was the description of it. It was round with a flat top. And they can still be seen in modern armed forces, referring to military. If you're in the armed forces, you're a soldier. So the name could refer to small circular boxes for carrying pills. Back in the day, that's where they would put their medicine. They would have these very beautiful pill boxes. Usually they were gold or silver or made of some nice metal. And then they'd open them up and there would be little pills that they would take for their health. Or maybe they wanted to get high and they were taking drugs. That happened too. So these were called pill boxes. And they were also round. Now, there's something that actually exists in the military that they were sort of patterned after as well. And these were round defensive positions made of concrete. They would put them up in order to protect a particular area from being invaded or maybe blown up. But those were also called pillboxes. Defensive means you're protecting yourself. You're not being aggressive and attacking somebody. Nope. You are in a defensive position, meaning you have a right to defend or protect yourself, whether it's you or maybe a building or your country, whatever. You're in a defensive position.
And the hat resembles both. To resemble just means to look like something. I resemble my brother, for example. Do you resemble your siblings at all, Stephanie?
I resemble my dad more than my siblings, yeah.
Okay, very good. So here the hat resembles both. It looks like pill boxes used to carry pills, or it also looks like those defensive positions which are made of concrete. And women's pillbox hats were especially popular in the 1950s and 60s. For example, we've got former U.S. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. She was the wife of, was it then John F. Kennedy, the guy who was shot in Dallas. And she was a notable public figure who wore them. If you're notable, that means you are well known. People know about you. You're famous, and they recognize you. And yes, indeed, I think she was, was she wearing a pillbox hat when her husband was shot? I'm not sure about that.
I think she might have been, yeah, maybe.
Could be, but if you see old pictures of Jackie Kennedy, then she's probably wearing that hat because she wore them quite often. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in today's lesson. Let's turn things over now to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们昨天带大家看了一下帽子的历史，然后它的功能，甚至还可以被当成是判断社会阶级的工具哦。不过现在没有这样子啦齁，所以我们今天来看到啊，这个帽子啊可以介绍几款比较常用的。文章一开始都告诉我们说，我们昨天提到的那些帽子其实都是为男性设计，但是现在女生戴帽子也有很多，也值得我们好好来看一下。在一开始这里第一段的第二句，特别注意一下那个 worthy of， 再加上名词或动词 ing， 就表示值得 worthy of， 把它当成一个介系词片语。好，那我们就来介绍3种很常见的帽子哦，女生的帽子。第一种也是我自己蛮喜欢的，就是中型帽 cloche， 它是法文啦，这个法文呢就是 bell， 就是钟的意思。那这个中型帽当然长得就像钟这个样子啦，哐咚的那个钟。好，你可以看一下杂志的照片，或者是呢，如果你现在正在听我们的 podcast， 可以 Google 一下中型帽长什么样子。那这些帽子啊，其实正是在法国诞生的。不过，在这个中型帽这里的第一句，我们要特别注意有一个特别的句型哦，它是一个强调句型。我们先把 it was 跟跳过 in France 后面有一个 that 这3个字都框起来。这个强调句型啊，我们先用手指把 it was 跟 that 遮掉之后，就会发现句子其实蛮完整的。In France， 在法国 these hats 这些中型帽 came into being 就这么样的产生了。那我们要特别强调，法国就是制造这些帽子的地方，所以我们要强调的是地点，我们把 in France 放在强调句型 it was 跟 that 的中间。那刚才提到的原本的这个陈述句啊，就把剩下 的东西全部都放在 that 之后，也就是说强调句型其实是插入一个完整的陈述，只是在一开始我们这个讲话的时候有时候没有特别强调什么，但是如果要特别强调一个就是在法国所产生的，那这个时候可以把地方副词放在强调句型 it is 或 was 跟 that 的中间。好，那当时呢，就有一个法国的设计师呢，他就设计了这种中型的帽子。同样在这一段，我们看一下第二句，有限定用法的关系子句哦。先行词是 a bell-shaped hat， 也就是中型的帽。后面 that 一直到句尾是限定用法关系子句，冠带 that， 就很容易制造，然后呢，也可以这个受到大家的欢迎。好，这是第一种。那第二种呢，我们要看一下。药盒帽，这个药盒帽啊，真的是形状就长得像药盒因为药盒就这样圆圆扁扁的，里面装几颗药嘛。不过药盒这个 pillbox 这个字啊，我们来看一下这一段的第三句。这个 pillbox 其实有两个意思哦，因为第一个意思，第三句我们先看到动词之后 refer to， 它指的就是 small circular boxes for carrying pills， 真的是药盒，但是逗点之后还有一个 or， 或者是 to pillboxes， 指的是所谓的圆形防御阵地，也就是碉堡。好，那 pillbox 字面上我们觉得是药盒嘛，其实它还有另外一个意思。那这个 pillboxes 就真的要靠补充说明的关系子句告诉我们这个 pillboxes 所谓的碉堡是什么。所以逗点之后的 which 到句尾可以全部的左右括号起来 which are round defensive positions made of concrete。 可是里面还有一个小的关系子句小的关系子句就在这句子最后面三个字 made of concrete， 那它当然是用来修饰前面的 round defensive positions， 再省略掉 which 或者是 that are made of concrete， 是由混凝土水泥所制造的这一些所谓的碉堡。那当然这个帽子呢，不管是跟药盒啦或者是碉堡都长得是很像的。而且呢，当时在1950年代60年代，美国的第一夫人贾桂琳甘乃迪呢，就是戴所谓的药盒帽而出名的公众人物哦。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We shall now continue with our lesson. Again, the focus today is on women's hats, and we've already talked about two kinds of hats that women had liked to wear in the past. I don't really know if they still wear them. We talked about cloche hats, which are bell-shaped hats that cover the head of the lady. And of course, they let the world know that you're sophisticated and they can be customized. We also talked about pillbox hats, which are round on the sides and flat on the top. And they were popular in the 50s and 60s. Jackie Kennedy wore one, and probably some other famous women as well. Now, the Fascinator hat is what we're going to talk about today. And these hats were so elaborate that their wearers can't help but stand out from a crowd. So a fascinator hat is from the word fascinating, and fascinating is the adjective. To fascinate is the verb, and a fascinator, I guess, is somebody or something that fascinates someone, which means they really get your attention. You really think that thing is really great, really detailed. Wow, that's fascinating. I really want to learn more about that thing.
Yeah, now there is a common mistake that's made in Taiwan with fascinating, so be careful. If you're interested in something, you can call something you're interested in fascinating, but you shouldn't say, I'm so fascinating. You could say, I'm fascinated. That's different. I'm fascinated with this, or I'm fascinated by something. But be careful, because that is a mistake that is actually very funny, because it sounds like you think you're pretty cool, or you're congratulating yourself for being so interesting. Be careful with that. So these hats are very elaborate. There are a lot of details to them, and the wearers can't help but stand out. If you can't help but something, it means you do that thing. So you stand out from a crowd. You don't just blend in. There's something very special about you, so you stand out. Meaning you're very easily noticed. People see you and they think, wow. They were first created by French Queen Marie Antoinette in the 18th century. Poor Marie Antoinette had her head chopped off because she was queen during their French Revolution. So unfortunately, her fashion wasn't appreciated enough by the people in France. But she was a fashion hog, we would say. She really dressed to the nines. She added feathers, flowers, jewelry, and even miniatures to her hats. If you're talking about a miniature, something, that is an adjective. It's saying something's really small. Usually it's a replica of something. We have miniature horses, though, which are very cute. So if it's a very small replica or copy of something, we'll often call those miniatures. And here, this is actually being used as a noun, and even miniatures to her hat. So something that's very small but represents something else.
I believe there's a museum in Taipei somewhere. I think it's on Jianguo North Road that has many miniatures. You can go there and check out these small versions of larger things. So you could put miniatures on this hat, maybe a little bear or something like that. And the term for them was coined in the 1970s when British milliner Stephen Jones wanted a name suggesting uniqueness and extravagance. So, yes, indeed, I guess they did not have a name for these hats all the way until the 1970s. And then someone coined the term, which means they came up with a word for something. They came up with a new word for this thing. And Stephen Jones thought, I need to have a name for this hat that suggests uniqueness and extravagance. Uniqueness, of course, means it's special. It can't be seen in another place. It's tailored to the individual. And also it symbolizes extravagance, which means having a lot of something or maybe having too much of something.
Right. So these days, Fascinator hats are often worn by royals. Of course, there are royals over in Europe, and our example here of a royal is Catherine, who's married to William, the Prince of Wales. He'll be the future king someday. Catherine often has very beautiful dresses and accessories. She's pretty fashionable, I might add. She adorns her hats with flowers, ribbons, and bows. To adorn something means to make something even more lovely than it is already. So you can adorn your hair with something. You can adorn your hat with something. Here she uses flowers, ribbons, and bows, but I'm sure you can use other things as well.
Indeed, so you can decorate them with all these different things and make them unique and special.
Yeah.
And you can stand out and get lots of pictures taken of you. Now, moving on now to the final paragraph, we wrap things up here. It says, while these hats aren't worn on a daily basis, check out pictures of any royal or formal occasion in the UK, and you'll see the tradition of fancy hats is still going strong. So, yes, indeed, we're talking about Fascinator hats, and yes, indeed, they don't wear them every day. I seem to remember that whenever they put pictures of the royals on there, the prince and the princess or whatever, the princess is always wearing one of these hats, okay? To me, they're kind of silly-looking hats, but I guess royalty do need to wear them. I don't think regular people would look right wearing such hats. It's probably too much.
No, it's a kind of stylish in the UK to wear hats. So it's something that isn't something we're used to in America, but they're awfully beautiful. Some of them are funny looking. I wouldn't put a bird in a hat on my head. I think that looks silly, but that's just my opinion, of course. We do wear hats on certain occasions in the United States. One that's very famous for requiring a hat, or you have to wear a hat if you show up because it's a big deal, is the Kentucky Derby. Kentucky is a state. A derby is a race for horses around a racetrack. And part of the culture and the tradition of the Kentucky Derby is for women to wear a fancy dress, not pants, fancy dress, and a beautiful hat, kind of like the hat you see in the UK for special occasions or being worn by the royals. Another place is Easter. Easter, especially when we were growing up, you'd get dressed up for church. You'd go to church and you'd put your fancy dress on and your fancy hat. I never did wear a hat on Easter, but I think it's kind of a fun tradition.
I should also mention that it is traditional to remove your hat when you go inside.
True.
If you're a man, I think women don't have to do that if they're wearing an Easter bonnet and they go to church. They don't have to take it off. But if you're a man and if you're wearing a hat or a baseball cap or something, you're supposed to take it off when you go inside. My mother used to nag me for that because most young people don't really understand that tradition. This is just a baseball cap, Mom. I can wear it anywhere I want. But she always insisted that whenever we went indoors somewhere, Tom, you got to take that cap off. It's impolite. It's rude.
Right. So a lot of the manners that we were raised with are being lost. We can say that. I think a lot of the younger generation don't know about some of these old-fashioned but very polite manners that we were brought up with. So it's kind of fun.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
接着我们就要看第3种啦 Fascinator hats 网纱头饰帽。这种网纱头饰帽就很漂亮，对不对？制作精良啊，然后戴上去的人都觉得好像是成为大家的焦点了。在这一段当中，先特别注意第一句话，这边有一个表示结果的句型 so that So 跟 that 中间夹的是 elaborate 就是很精美很精致的意思。因为这种帽子是如此的精美 that 以至于有一个结果产生的 that 后面的结果就是 their wearers can't help but stand out from a crowd 在这里又有很重要的片语就是忍不住不禁不得不不自觉无法抵抗如何 can't help 的这里的 help 不是帮忙而是避免 avoid avoid 或者是抵抗 resist resist 的意思后面如果加 but but 的话呢就会加动词原形如果 but 这个连接词 but 不加就直接加名词或者是动词 ing 就好了就表示不禁不得不忍不住如何好，那最初是由法国的王后在18世纪发明了，然后发明上面就添一些羽毛啊、鲜花啊，甚至珠宝啊、小型的雕像。不过这款帽子的名字呢，则是在1970年代所创造的。我们特别看一下第4句的地方，这个1970年代 the 1970s 后面的 when 一直到句尾可以左右括号，它是限定用法关系子句我们看到的 when 是一个关复。好，限定用法。而在当时 and in the 1970s 这里的 when 指的是在当时如何好，在当时大家都想要一个能够暗示独特跟奢华的名字，所以当时就创了这样子的一个所谓的 Fascinator hats。那我们接下来就要看第5句，也有一个补充说明的关系子句，先行词就是 Catherine 逗点 Princess of Wales 逗点who 后面到句尾才补充说明Wales 的王妃 Catherine 就用鲜花、丝带、蝴蝶结来装饰她的帽子所以下次戴帽子的时候或许大家也可以挑选一下是想要好用的中型帽或者是漂亮的药盒帽还是网纱头帽呢以上是我们的今天内容我是 Anna 我们下次见
That's it for today, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. And hey, head out to your local hat store and buy yourself a hat to make yourself really sharp. From all of us here at English Digest, my name is Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.